This is The Civil Fleet, the podcast focused on the activist-led refugee rescue and support missions across Fortress Europe, with me, Ben Coles. In this episode, we are speaking with Toni from Corporate Watch about Titan Airways, a charter airline company that is making millions from Britain's deportation regime. Toni is going to tell us how the firm generates wealth by tearing families apart, how it's making a killing from every juncture in the cycle of war, and how it's using sport to wash its image. Okay, before we get on with the show, I'd like to remind you that the Civil Fleet is not just a podcast, it's also a news blog. Go to civilfleet.com and you can find some interviews there, some news reports, and some investigative stories too. If you like what the Civil Fleet is doing and you would like to help us to continue to platform these amazing people that we have had on this podcast, if you want to help us to continue this grassroots journalism, then you can do a couple of things. You can share us around on social media. You can tell your friends about us. You can give us reviews on podcast apps, which would be really nice. Or you could just put some money our way, help us to cover the costs of doing all of this. If you go to co-fi.com/civilfleet, you can sign up there to make a one-off donation, a monthly donation, or whatever you like. So that's ko-fi.com. All right, so let's get on with the show. All right, Toni, thank you very, very much for coming on the Civil Fleet podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So today we are going to talk about, you are a journalist with Corporate Watch, and we're going to talk about an article which you worked on about Titan Airways and their deportation regime, I guess you could call it, their work with the deportation in the UK. It's a really great article. I'm going to have links for it, so everyone listening to the podcast should go check out the article. But before we get into all of that, could you tell us a bit about yourself, how you ended up at Corporate Watch?
Yeah, of course. So my sort of journey into, I guess, like writing and research started at an organisation in West Yorkshire called the Racial Justice Network. And we basically had found out through kind of word of mouth that the West Yorkshire Police had been piloting this new form of mobile fingerprint devices, and it was being piloted in our area. And so we decided to create just some kind of awareness campaign and organising around it to try and basically stop this pilot scheme of mobile fingerprinting being rolled out to the rest of the country. Obviously, in the nature of these pilot schemes that the Home Office run, it's never really a pilot. It's just the first place where it rolls out. And nationally, mobile fingerprint devices were being used in police forces across Wales and England. And so my work as a campaigner and community organiser was focused around people having access to legal advice, to knowing their rights, and also being able to resist the use of these mobile fingerprint devices, because overwhelmingly they targeted migrants, they targeted Black people, and they targeted Asian people. And so I worked on that campaign for basically between 2018 and 2025. And that's what brought me to Corporate Watch, because through one of their trainings, which was research against racism, I was given the opportunity to learn more about digging deeper into the companies who are actually funding the Home Office biometrics program, particularly IBM and other military partners like BAE Systems. So this way of researching and opening up was quite novel to me. I'd worked in film and documentary before this, and it was really exciting to be able to put a name and put addresses and put faces to these kind of horrible, ghoulish, extremely well paid contracts that seemingly don't belong to anyone. So that's kind of my journey prior to Corporate Watch. I also worked as a community organiser in Leeds, focusing on transformative justice and people having alternatives for community safety as opposed to going to the police. So a lot of my work has been around what the police and Home Office structure functions as institutionally and operationally, and also how people can find healing and reparative justice outside of those systems. So that's who I am alongside and before Corporate Watch.
Oh, that was amazing. Thanks. That was really great. And you have to, if we can, you'd have to send me links to the stuff you did about the fingerprint. What did you say? Mobile fingerprint devices that they did.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So basically, just to explain it, police officers were given these new sort of devices which allowed them access to the Home Office migration databases in addition to the police national computer. So police officers were able to basically stop people and profile them and check with their fingerprints against these databases. And often a lot of the information on these databases, especially the Home Office one, may be invalid, it might be out of date, it might not be correct information. So people were potentially being detained and deported with wrong information. So we were basically trying to we were reaching out to people who'd experienced this, and also trying to give people bystander tools so that if they witnessed a stop or they experienced a stop, they would know their rights and ideally be able to deter officers from escalating the situation any further.
Yeah, I have to say I'm absolutely shocked that West Yorkshire Police would be involved in something like that. So that sounds really good. Yeah, I'll try to get a link to that in the show notes. That sounds really, really fascinating. If you have any written work, do send it over and we'll get it in the show notes. I feel like I could talk to you for ages about all that stuff, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. That's really, really interesting. Why don't you tell us? We've had two people from Corporate Watch whose names I'm going to blank unless I get it up on my screen. It was... we had Sophie and Patrick from Corporate Watch on the Civil Fleet in June 2023. And we talked about a very similar thing that we're talking about today. Actually, I think we'll probably talk about them later on, maybe. We talked about deportation flights being organised by Air Partner, a company called Air Partner, and another company called CarlsonWagonlit, which I think are connected somehow. But we'll get into that later. We talked, and that was in episode 40. It was a while ago now. So today, before we start talking about Titan Airways and your recent article, could you just give us a bit of a background on Corporate Watch? I think they're amazing. They do such great work, and it's good to have them on the podcast again.
Yeah, of course. So Corporate Watch is a workers' co-op, and we're basically a collection of researchers and trainers who are trying to stand up to corporate power. So I think Sophie mentioned that the Corporate Watch was born out of the anti-roads movement, which was a direct action movement in the early to mid 1990s. And basically this same group of companies kept on turning up over and over, which were Tarmac, Costain, Balfour, Betty and BT. Sorry. People began to basically realise that there was a need for understanding who the companies were, how they operated, and where the weak points were. So, as I'd mentioned before, my sort of journey into Corporate Watch was through one of these trainings. And in addition to the research that we do, basically we help activists and organisers do their own research into companies and their subsidiaries and try and use that as a means for action. So, being able to have a wheelhouse of campaign tactics, of direct action, disruptive strategies. The research and the trainings are there to basically support people in doing that kind of work. And Corporate Watch is turning 30 this year. So in addition to continuing to do our own research, we're also celebrating and reflecting on some of the great work that has happened over the years. So it's nice to be able to be on your podcast again, Ben. It's sad, the reasons why, that it's quite cyclical, and we're going to be discussing some of similar topics. But I think it goes to show that it's worth building our networks as people who are on the other side of this sort of horrible capitalist regime, where we're continuing to support each other's work, continuing to to get that information out in networks, and continuing to use the information for action.
Yeah, it's such a great organisation. Corporate Watch, and I urge everyone listening to go and check them out if you haven't done already. If you don't know them, definitely go check them out. So before we get into everything else as well, maybe we can just set a bit of background information. Like, we don't need to go super deep into any of this, but we have a new Prime Minister in the UK at the moment. Wonder how long this is like our sixth or seventh Prime Minister in 10 years. It's pretty crazy. Unfortunately, he's kept the same Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, who has worked on the same shameful schemes as many of the other Home Secretaries in the last 10 years. We had the Rwanda scheme, which we've done episodes on the podcast. I'll link to that, which was involved. I don't know if Titan Airways was involved in that, but some of the other companies linked to them, I think, were.
Titan themselves weren't actually quite publicly made a rare statement to say that they weren't connected to this scheme. However, one of their former CEOs, Alistair Wilson, who we'll talk about later, he did in fact join a company who was Avia Solutions Group, which were trying very hard for these Rwanda contracts.
Yeah, and the Rwanda scheme was the UK government was going to deport people to Rwanda that were failed asylum seekers. They were going to send them there, which is crazy. At the moment, I don't think they're talking about. The government hasn't, as far as I'm aware, made plans to do that again to anywhere else. There was when Yvette Cooper, I think, was the Home Secretary. She was there was reports of them talking with Albania, because I think Italy has been or had, I'm not sure if they're still doing it, sending people to Albania, which is crazy. And then, I don't know whether, there's so many of these policies that the Home Office has against asylum seekers. Was there any that strike you as particularly bad, or any that you think we should focus on at the moment before we get into it?
Well, I mean, there's one scheme in particular which is an exercise of cruelty called the one in, one out scheme, which I think you've had guests on before speaking about it, probably with much better detail than I can. But that treaty was set up between Shabana Mahmood and Laurent Nunez, the French, I think I said I pronounced that correctly, the French Interior Minister. And this is basically as part of this idea of trying to tackle these channel crossings that are happening between France and the UK. The one in, one out scheme basically is an agreement to return people who are on the move, making the boat crossings from the Channel back to France. And that's in exchange with accepting asylum seekers from France. So this agreement has actually had to be rewritten in different ways as well, because some people who have been returned after being deported from the UK back to France basically have returned on lorries again. And so this idea that each successive government who comes in is going to be tougher and tougher on migration. In practice, actually, they come up with quite ineffective schemes which are exercises of cruelty, which are disproportionately targeting people with experience of torture, with ill health, with who fled war and conflict. And then underneath all of that, companies like CarlsonWagonlit or Air Partner or Titan Airways, who our article is about, basically make so much money in the process. And so, it's interesting to even think about what the purpose of the one in, one out scheme is, other than a kind of performance art piece, a performance piece of work where people make a lot of money and extreme cruelty is exercised.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it, performance art of cruelty. I feel like a lot of these policies, like that one, like housing people in old military sites, they want to get old military bases to take people out of hotels, which are already a bad place to be holding asylum seekers, and put them in old military bases, which is awful. Or making asylum seekers pay for the cost of of housing them as well. These are policies that Shabana Mahmood has been working on, or developing, that the previous Tory governments did. It's crazy. It is like, and it costs so much money. Like that's the thing that always surprises me when I was reading your article. Like how much money is going towards these companies that will deport people that do something so cruel. And there's a line in your article that says the company generates wealth by tearing families apart, which I thought is really apt. It's just so crazy. And the Rwanda scheme was just like one of the worst examples that they've done. But this one in one out scheme is really bad as well. And you have linked in your article to I think it's a UN document. I can't actually remember now, but it has examples of people that have made it to the UK and were about to be deported to France or were. There's a Palestinian guy there whose family was like blown up in an Israeli shelling of his house, and then that just his story was really terrible. It's just that I don't know how the UK government could think deporting people that've been in situations like that. Yeah. How they can think that's a good idea. And one in one out. It's just like, how can we become a nightclub all of a sudden? Like this is a crazy idea.
It's such extreme cruelty, yeah, and that's the thing that feels missing in a lot of these discussions as well. Like I guess a lot of corporate media really like they lean into this framing of illegal migrants when a lot of the time the people are coming here that they have every right, they have a legal right to claim asylum, and they're coming through such cruel circumstances, through such awful circumstances. And instead of seeing the sort of humanity and compassion in that, instead this sort of dehumanizing language and ideology is put on them instead of being able to. So that's why that UN article report is really good actually, because it goes more into detail of where everybody's coming from, and from places like Sudan, from Eritrea, and the levels of psychological distress that doctors have witnessed in some of these people should be the headlines, but unfortunately, it's not. So kind of hoping that maybe some of this work can help humanize people and bring more compassion to these experiences.
Yeah, I hope so. That's why I hope that the podcast, this is one of the things that the Civil Fleet podcast does, I hope. But yeah, like it's just, I hate the way that the corporate media often refers to people seeking asylum. It's just awful. And that's how we've created this situation, right? How the governments are willing to spend so much money on deporting people. So let's move on to, unless there was anything else you wanted to talk about, like kind of background information on in the UK situation. It's crazy. What are the things that are happening here for asylum seekers, I think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered quite a fair bit. It's unending. There's always something new every day, but maybe some of those things might naturally come up a bit later on anyway. Is there anything you wanted to talk about more further?
No, I'm ready to move on to your article now. So can you tell us, like, your article is focused on Titan Airways. Tell us about them. Who are they? And why did you look into them?
Yes. So Titan Airways are basically a company which provide, as their CFO describes it, a kind of scattergun of different services. In industry speak, they provide something called ACMI, which is aircraft, crew, maintenance and insurance. And this is for passenger and cargo flights. So often they'll have like high profile guests who might have included sports teams like the England Lionesses or Arsenal or Manchester United. And also they lease their planes to include tour operators, people like Jet2, TUI, who are also complicit in a lot of these deportation schemes, British Airways and EasyJet, and also delivery services. But underlying all of this kind of like corporate friendly and family friendly image, Titan Airways is by far one of the worst and most frequent deportation airlines. And in 2026, according to Deportation Watch data, they were the most active provider for the Home Office. for the Home Office's cruel forced expulsions. And in 2026, they were conducting near-weekly deportation flights. So we just wanted to write another profile on Titan, just to highlight how kind of active they are, despite them not really being that much of a household name. And often this is because they're leasing their jets, or they're conducting charter deportations, which are a type of deportation where, commercial passengers aren't present. It's purely just people who are being deported and security agents and people who are running the flights themselves. So this is often why Titan's been able to go under the radar, but we don't think they should. We don't think they should be able to do that. So that's a little bit of kind of who Titan Airways are, and like what their brand is versus what their work is.
Yeah, like I'd never heard of them before. Well, I mean, I'd heard of them because I've read your Corporate Watch work before, and I've been covering this thing for ages, this kind of asylum seeker stuff for a while. But yeah, you never see advertisements for them or anything, do you? Like the other, you mentioned like TUI, and is it Jet2? And some other companies use British Airways use their services. Yeah, and so can you tell us, like, you mentioned one of the owners before, was it Alistair somebody? Who owns them?
So the actual owner is a man called Gene Wilson, a very rich man based in Essex. And his son, Alistair, was the former CEO of Titan Airways. And it seemed as though that it was going to be a family business, and Titan might have been passed on to his son. But actually, Alistair basically in 2022 was given the role of CEO, and then only in June 2023 he left the company, resigned as CEO and also as a director of another 5 of his father's subsidiary companies, including Titan Airways, Hargendale, Zap Air Leasing, and Zap Airways. And he was taken up by another group called Avia Solutions, and they acquired an airline which was renamed to Ascend Airways. So, I mean, Gene himself is the 100% shareholder of Titan Airways, and in the past sort of year or so, we've seen now him being paid millions in dividends. So in 2025, he was paid 5 million dividends. And also another company which Gene owned called Airstar was also liquidated, which released another £5 million pounds to him. Kind of signalling that maybe Gene, our older millionaire who's wanting to look at giving his company over to his sons, is potentially retiring. He's kind of an interesting figure. There's not a lot available online about Gene, but he was last sort of publicly valued around £70 million. That was in 2018, and he's also been on these kind of Essex rich lists in the 2020s as well. So despite a kind of, again, it's interesting the contrast between this sort of undercover and covert identity versus these extreme amounts of money that the company's paying out to their shareholders. So that is who Titan Airways is.
I mean, it seems like, although we don't know, but it looks like he's had some kind of feud with his son, who's formed a rival airway, right? Obviously, we don't know the details of that. But did you say his son, the company whose name I forgot, they were involved in the Rwanda, or did they get involved in the Rwanda scheme as well?
Yeah, so Ascend basically we named them as one of the potential candidates for supplying the plane that was trying to charter a flight to Rwanda, but this was the plane that was cancelled at the last minute in 2024. And the company did manage to have around 6 deportation flights between November and February, but Ascend actually went into liquidation this year. So unfortunately, it's hard to tell the true story of Ascend and how awful the company could have been.
One thing that I find really strange about, I think this is actually probably quite normal, but like you've got Titan Airways, which is owned by another company, which is owned by some other company, and it's just layers and layers of companies. And what I think is really good that you do with Corporate Watch is you name these people, because like there's people behind this and there's money going to two people, right? It's just bizarre. What a strange world we live in.
Yeah, because as well, I mean, Titan Airways is a subsidiary of a parent company called Zap Air Holdings. And under Zap, there's multiple companies where basically the profits across these companies are kind of spread out, and it also makes it easier to kind of hide exactly where money is cascading to. And yeah, ultimately it all falls back to Gene, which is the funniest part about it, where it's like there's layers upon layers of holding companies and subsidiaries for Titan, but the money, the most of the profits go back to one man.
And so I think you say in the article it's not like the government someone at the Home Office calls up Titan Airways and is like, "Hi, can you deport these people for us?" Like, can you talk a bit about how the contract kind of works with the government?
Yeah, of course. So I think Sophie will have probably covered this in the episode 40, but Titan doesn't directly actually hold a contract with the government for the deportations. Rather, these deportation flights have been fixed by another partner company called Air Partner. So Air Partner is a subcontractor for another international travel mega corporation called CarlsonWagonlit. And I think at the time when Sophie was here, CarlsonWagonlit was holding basically this £5.7 million 7-year contract with the Home Office, which was labelled provision of travel services for immigration purposes. That said contract actually has gone up again for tender in 2025, but has shot all the way up to £391.7 million. So it's interesting as well, just to jump back to these sort of successive governments and successive prime ministers, that Labour and the Conservative government, you might have been able to say that they're indistinguishable from one another, but actually Labour has funneled way more money into these sort of cruel deportation programmes and removal directives. But Titan, basically, the way it would work is that they would probably bid for these deportation flights, and Air Partner would be the one who fixes the flights for them. And interestingly, there's a revolving door between Titan and Air Partner. So, for example, the commercial director of Titan, Alexander Harrington, he worked at Air Partner's commercial jets divisions between 2007 and 2012. And there was also overlap there with Alistair Wilson, the former CEO, who also used to work at Air Partner. So there's somewhat of an internal kind of preferential system happening between Air Partner and Titan as well.
Yeah, so it's like it's boggling in my mind still, like how it's these layers and layers, subsidiaries of companies, and they all seem quite connected to each other. And yeah, you mentioned how much did you say that was in 2025? Like 300 and something million?
391.7 million. So that was from 5.7 million in the 7 years before that.
And you have a quote in the article from Emily Thornberry, who's a Labour MP. I don't think she's got a position in the government at the moment. But she said, was this in 2021 she said this, or what, 22 or something? She said, I'm just going to read from the article what he says here. It says, following that revelation, which I think is how much money the British government was giving this company, Emily Thornberry criticised the deal as reflecting ministers' addiction to the private jet lifestyle. And then, now her government's in power, her political party's in power, they're doing more money. It's just wild to me.
It's it's wild, it's bonkers, and it's bananas. Alongside, obviously, the deportation money that they make, Titan also is a valued customer to the Prime Minister's office, and they leased a jet to Number 10 in 2021, which basically was a contract that's been extended up until about 2027. And there was estimates that the deal could cost around £100 million over 6 years from the civil service. And in 2022, an FOI request submitted by the Taxpayers Alliance found that the paint job alone cost £783,000. So, yeah, I mean, Emily was spot on there about this kind of addiction to the private jet lifestyle, and I do believe it's still in use by Number 10.
Yeah, crazy. Wow. And I did total side tangent here, but like I saw the other day that I saw a post on social media. I need to check that it's true, but like apparently the one day last month or this month, it was the busiest day of air travel ever in the history of the world. Which sounds, I don't know, I didn't check if it's true, but it sounds like something that could be true because air travel just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And it just, I wonder if anyone's ever looked at. Do you know if anyone's ever looked at like the environmental impact of this deportation regime? Ever heard of anything like that? I'd be really interested to know what it would be.
People and Planet might have any information about that. That's very interesting. I don't. Yeah. I couldn't give you an answer on that. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It would be interesting to know. Like hopefully someone looks into that. But that would be because it must be not good. Particularly if they hire in private, these. It's not exactly a private jet that the people are being deported in, right? Like when you say private jet, it feels like one with like a swimming pool in it or something. Something you might imagine Donald Trump flying in.
But it is worth. I think you can frame it in that sort of way because for example, on one of these deportation flights that happened in February 2025. The ratio was like 40 people who were being detained and deported to like 150 security guards. So like these entire huge planes have been taken up to move only 40 people. I mean, yes, then they've been given an entourage of bullies of about 150 people. But these are not flights that are kind of for the public good, I guess. It's kind of, there's parallels to private jets in that it's about like the use of resources and the waste of money and the sort of performance element again. I mean, yeah, I guess in private jets it's performing your wealth. In this one it's performing your cruelty, but I don't know. Maybe that's a bit of a reach, that analogy.
I think when I hit the word private jet, imagine like a billionaire or Taylor Swift or someone with like a ridiculous amount of money with no attachment to reality flying around the world in, some lovely plane. But I guess like when people are being deported they are private chartered flights. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. Chartered flights. They're not in like lovely leather seats, are they? Well, I imagine it's, yeah. So yeah, shall we talk about like, there's a part in your article I thought was really interesting as well. Something I think about a lot. Is you said the company extracts profits from every juncture of the cycles of war. Can you tell us a bit about that? How does that work?
Yeah, so as sort of detailed in the article, which I've co-written with a colleague as well, just wanted to highlight that. These same planes that are dropping off weapons and soldiers and people into conflict zones are also picking up British evacuees. And then using the same planes to deport people to the same places people are being, conflict zones, people are being taken out of, then being deported back into conflict zones again. And so, for example, this cycle can allow Titan to say, that they're so proud of their role in repatriating 1,600 British nationals who were caught up in the military conflict in Sudan in 2023, or also repatriating British nationals from the UAE and Oman amid the kind of recent UK-supported attacks on Iran, this sort of illegal US-Israel war in Iran. And some of those nationals, include these kind of tax exiles who've left the UK for more for greener pastures in terms of tax payment. But this same company, you know, also deported Afghans into like one of the world's most deadly conflict zones in 2019. And, you know, they still continue to deport people in near weekly flights. So there's an interesting sort of contrast there of taking people out of conflict zones, but also dropping them back in them as well.
Yeah, and it's like something I think about a lot often is sort of like there was this. I know during the slave trade in the 1700s, there was like a what do they call it? There was a circular trade. So they'd take people from Africa, send them to the Caribbean, make sugar or rum or whatever, bring that products, the profits from that to Britain, sell them there, and then redo the whole thing, right? And I think it's a bit crass to compare the situation now to then. But there's this kind of like, you have these arms companies that blow the shit out of, that get sold to like, dictators and brutal regimes around the world, or get dropped by the US in Iran, for example, and by Israel and Gaza. People flee, and then the same companies that all like set up the borders, the surveillance companies and drones and stuff. And then once they get in, then there's companies making money deporting people. It's just it's an incredibly cruel system. It's capitalism, I suppose.
Yeah, I was going to say it's capitalist to its core, isn't it? Like it's the kind of thing that you see across different industries, where it's like whether it's through war criminals and these company like arms companies, or even through like tech companies and AI, where people are able to create their own problems and then make profit in either regulating the problem or like removing people from problem area, like from conflict areas, or or trying to come up with the software that gets rid of viruses, and you've created the viruses. Like all of these different sort of, there's a schema there within capitalism where it's like you get to cannibalize, like kind of self-cannibalize, like you get to create the problem and make money off fixing the problem at the same time.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, something I think about a lot of that, like just how cruel and just awful it is to be making money from that whole cycle of misery. And like, you said earlier that the company says it's proud of having evacuated people, but I doubt they would say they're proud of having deported people, right? They wouldn't be like, we're proud to have deported people to Afghanistan. Do you know which countries they've sent people to? Like you mentioned Afghanistan. Do you know anywhere else they've, either Titan Airways or any other companies, where do they send people back to?
So primarily they've been deporting people to France, Albania and Romania in the past year, and to a lesser extent there've been some deportation flights to Poland and the Gambia. But I guess historically Titan has kind of deported people to places all around the world actually, and it's more recently that they've been using deporting people to France and Romania. This is probably likely connected to the one in, one out schemes and different kind of agreements across Europe. But yes, in the past they've deported people to Gambia. They've also deported people to Ghana. They've deported people to the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. So it seems that they in the past have applied this scattergun concept to also the deportations, that they would deport people to anywhere. And obviously with the Rwanda plan, that was one of the only sort of times publicly that they made a statement to say we wouldn't deport people there. But in that same year, for example, in 2022, they were also named and shamed for planning a pre-Christmas mass deportation flight to Jamaica as well. And that was kind of like through a kind of efforts of high-profile celebrities why this flight was then cancelled. And it's kind of interesting that I think this company is sensitive to quite high-profile celebrities, or they're quite sensitive to high-profile kind of shaming campaigns, like with the Rwanda scheme, that they definitely didn't want to associate themselves with something like that. So it's quite interesting in terms of action that like there's potential vulnerable areas for pressuring this company to stop doing deportation flights, potentially through this avenue of their more high-profile client list. In terms of reputational damage.
Yeah, and so hopefully this podcast this podcast will be some small like step towards the shaming of this company, right? And hopefully more people will know about it. The Rwanda plan was so toxic. I think just no one wanted to be associated with it. Yeah, and I mean unless people were crazy, they did. And so, I've got in my notes here a section of we can talk about how the deportation flights work, but I feel like we've kind of spoken about it. I don't know. Could you explain that if we haven't done already?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could say the way that they work obviously is they're brokered by Air Partner, and Titan themselves tend to run these charter deportation flights, which are they're mass deportation flights where it tends to be a small number of detainees to a large amount of security guards. And the example I used of a flight to Albania with 150 security guards to 41 detainees is a kind of good example of this. And in the past as well, that they've been reported to be quite nasty affairs, these flights. So, for example, in 2016, there was a deportation charter to Ghana, and witnesses, they saw removal guards asking to bind passengers who were in physical pain. And these sort of people were outnumbered by the guards of 8-1. Similarly, Corporate Watch also reported in 2020 on 2 Titan-operated mass deportation flights to Germany, where people who were on these planes had committed serious self-harm. And some of these people were removed, but then they were replaced again by people who likely had less access to legal support and legal representation. During the COVID-19 pandemic, flights were also taken off which had inadequate social distancing and didn't have any kind of health measures or testing facilities provided to stop the spread of COVID-19. And especially in the one-in, one-out scheme, a lot of these people have a serious risk of self-harm or suicide due to the experiences of torture and conflict, which had brought them to the UK to seek asylum in the first place. And there was a report at Harmondsworth, which is one of the detention centres close to Heathrow Airport, that people basically who were being targeted, there was a report who came from the detainees themselves, but people who were being targeted, it's seemingly quite arbitrary as well. So most people who are coming over on the boats are able to go to hotels or other accommodation and then have their claims processed, but a small percentage of people were selected to be deported back to France on one of these charter planes. And, it's people coming from a variety of conflict zones, from Sudan, Afghanistan, Iran. And, they've basically been subjected to arbitrary detention, denial of legal representation, like inadequate medical care, and just degrading treatment and even worse, psychological harm. And that's people who are coming to the UK, in trying to flee from these conditions, who are seeking, safety and just like a chance to have a good life, a peaceful life. And so, that's kind of the nature of these flights, really. It seems quite arbitrary. It's an extremely expensive activity as well. So, for example, in 2023, there's been estimates of the cost being around $22,000 per person, with some tabloid papers even even in 2025, estimating around £1 million per person on these flights. And Corporate Watch has kind of like given an estimate of around the flights costing somewhere around 180,000. But these are really, really expensive flights to run as well, for something that's quite arbitrarily decided.
Yeah, it's just it's mind-boggling how much money gets spent on this, and how much money the government its priorities are just really depressing, right? And so you mentioned people getting sent to like Germany, people getting sent to France. I take it these are not German or Albania. There might be Albanian citizens on there, but I take it they're not French or German citizens, right? It'd probably be people that were asylum seekers that were Dublin, that are like, fingerprinted in those countries, being sent back. Is that what's happening?
Yeah. It tends to be people seeking asylum, but it may also be people as well who've had criminal convictions in the UK. So I don't currently have any data. I couldn't say for sure exactly the makeup of everybody on those flights, but often it's people from who are seeking asylum who've just been fingerprinted initially in France or passed through these countries before getting to the UK, which they have every right to do. There's nothing to say you have to stop at the first place you move through when seeking asylum.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's something people forget, right? When people are like, "Oh, they stopped in safe countries, why didn't they stay there?" But that's not how it works, right? You have the right basically to claim asylum. Doesn't mean you have the right to get it, but you have the right to go and move where you like, right?
Especially because often people are, because often people are going to certain places because of family ties or diasporic ties. And it's not just a case of people just coming to the UK because the UK is this honeypot and it's easy to take things from. There's meaningful reasons why people come here. And despite all the cruelty of these schemes, they're not necessarily deterrents from that, because those ties people aren't coming because the Home Office, is offering them this amazing way of living. It's usually because of some sort of historical, usually like colonial dynamic between the UK and a lot of the places that people are coming from.
Yeah, and the money and whatever, like you said, this honeypot thing is a lie anyway. I can't remember exactly how much asylum seekers get a week, but it's something around 30. It's less than 40 quid, and like living on that a week is not like exactly a honeypot. And like I always I had the chance to ask people about this, but I don't think I did. But like, I don't think people coming to the UK think about that. I don't think they think I'm going to get 40 quid a week, or whatever it is. I don't think they think about that at all. It's like you said, they're coming here because of family, or a lot of people on the move that I've met that were on their way to the UK, they were coming here because they thought it was cool. They like football or whatever. They like the culture and the music, and that's why they're coming here. They want to be a part of that, or that's why they were going to Italy or other places.
Yeah, exactly. It's just it's a bit of a myth, isn't it, that people think that the UK is this amazing place to extract money from, and that people are being given loads of money when they come here, because it's just not the reality at all. I just looked it up online. I think it's gone up recently, but it's still not much. It's 49. I think it's £49 a week now. But that, what could you do with £49 a week?
Yeah, not very much.
Not very much.
Probably eat some really horrible food. Yeah. So sports washing is something that you mentioned. I've noticed that my notes I put sports watching. Sports washing is something that this company has taken part in. We've just seen a huge example of that in the World Cup in the United States, trying to clean people's images through using sports. Qatar World Cup was another example of that. I mean, there's millions of examples of it. Formula One, it's just an insane sports washing. The whole thing is just a sports washing, I think. Anyway, Can you talk a bit about, you mentioned this in the article, this company has been involved in this a little bit.
Yeah, well, actually, Titan had their participation in the FIFA World Cup that's just finished. So they were chosen by FIFA and Coca-Cola and Air Partner USA to operate the sort of World Cup trophy tour. You know, they're traveling around the world to all these amazing countries, including France, a country where they routinely charter deportation flights as well. So kind of feeds into that idea of this sort of cycle again of them making money on both sides of the sort of overground, more sorry, I'm trying to think of the word, like the overground, more palatable forms of ways of making money through like high profile sports clients versus their more underground but extremely profitable deportation flights. And as I'd mentioned, you know, they'd flown around teams like Arsenal and Manchester United, and significantly in 2025, they flew back the England ladies football team, the Lionesses, after they won their Euro Championship. And it's a shame to see this sort of contrast, because the Lionesses as a football team, you know, they've made public declarations against racism, which is totally at odds with Titan's role as a mass deportations profiteer. And, you know, their manager, Serena Wiegman, had stated, you know, that gestures like taking the knee aren't enough to tackle racism, and that the team wants to go further and do more, and they're in solidarity with players who've experienced racism. But that racism extends into the immigration system. If we look at the World Cup as well, like we can see that connection between the sports worlds and these horrible racist immigration regimes, like the Iraqi player Ayman Hussein. He was detained and questioned for hours in Chicago on his way to the World Cup. There was a Somali referee who was banned, had a travel ban put on him and wasn't able to participate in the World Cup. And even Vozina, the kind of, you know, the sort of beloved goalkeeper of Cape Verde in the competition, his mother was unable to join him in the World Cup because of these extremely high visa fees. I think somewhere around £20,000 is expected to pay just to come to visit the US. And, you know, FIFA co-signs these sorts of things. And the players and the teams, when they're using, you know, aircrafts from companies who are just doing such horrible, heinous deportations and removals, when they use these planes, they co-sign the teams. And it might be coming from a place of, you know, ignorance. They might not be aware because, as we said, you know, Titan isn't exactly a household name. They're not, you know, they're more, what they share on their website and what they're more known for are these kind of high profile clients. They're known for their family friendly kind of Lapland adventures, and they're known for, you know, like for being connected to like DHL and UPS, you know, these things which seem on the surface pretty innocent. There's nothing wrong with those things. But then when you dig down into the crux of the business model, which is deportations alongside all of it, I think that, you know, there's an anchor there. There's a point there that can be broken open, you know, and connecting the people who are using, again, like if the Lionesses you know, against racism, they probably would be against this sort of activity too.
Absolutely. I mean, hopefully they find out about it. I imagine they're just getting on a plane. The team don't really realize. But yeah, they it's crazy, and like sports washing is such a huge problem these days, and like it's used to like hide, you know, to try to boost the reputations of lots of terrible governments, the US included, around the world, right? That's such a sad situation. But hopefully, you know, they find out about this. They would, I imagine. Well, I don't know any of them, but hopefully they would take a stand if they found out about it. They seem pretty cool, the Lionesses in particular. So, was there anything else you wanted to say about Titan? Because I want to move on to like my last big horrible question. But like, is there anything about this Titan or anything that we talked about that you wanted to talk about that I've not asked you about, or anything in particular about the situation you wanted to talk about before we go to the last bit of the podcast?
Honestly, no. I think we've covered quite a good ground there. Yeah. I can't think of anything in particular, so I'm good to move on.
Cool. I think it's such a great article. I'm going to have links for it. People can read it, and everything that everything that Corporate Watch does is great, and I really encourage people to go and check them out. So before, and usually at the end of the podcast, I like to ask people how they're feeling about the future. Usually, I feel really pessimistic about the future. But like I'm not talking about the future in general. I mean the future for people on the move. Although you can talk about the future in general if you like. But yeah, how are you feeling about it? How do you how do you feel about things, the way things are going?
Yeah, it's a really tough question, that one, actually. I think because in my heart I like to hope that people would be able to see through some of this sort of, I guess, the sort of media circus around immigration as this issue, and be able to connect more on a human level and have more compassion for people who are on the move, for people who are seeking asylum. But unfortunately, with the rise of parties like Restore Britain and Reform UK, it does seem that there's a global trend actually of contempt and hatred towards migrants. I like to believe, that increasingly as more people turn towards things like direct action and turn towards, and especially as the kind of the gap between wealthy and poor is increasing as well, that may mean that there's more ripe conditions there for revolutionary action, and that people may be more able to see their class interests as aligned with people who are on the move, people who are seeking asylum. And I have endless compassion and hope for that as well. But the part of me that reads the news, unfortunately, and sees the world as it's moving, feels less optimistic. Yeah, I'm very sorry that I don't want that to be my response, to be honest.
No, that's all right. I often feel quite depressed about the situation of the world that it is in. But the thing I always take a lot of optimism from is like people do it, like there's so much activism, there's so much people fighting about stuff, there's so much like community organizations and things of people like not taking shit, taking direct action. And I think that in this country you've got, let's got to be careful here. There's groups that take direct action against companies involved in the genocide in Gaza that have been banned. And the fact that they've been banned and the fact that the government sees groups like that as a threat, I think it kind of does show how useful and how direct action campaigns can be. So they obviously feel a threat. And the fact that Trump keeps talking about communism, I think the mere fact that he's worried about it is kind of a good. Hopefully it means that there's something, that they are riled about the way people are thinking about things.
I like your answer more. I'm going to say what you said. These disruptive strategies do really threaten the institutions, and that's probably why the crackdown's been so intense, because they're effective and they challenge a lot more than certain things which are maybe more safer. Maybe more liberal methods which are slightly safer, but it's all part of like an ecosystem of trying to shift things so that people can choose compassion and humanity over sort of more comfortable myths like of illegal migration. And I do think Gaza is a really good example, actually, where people have been witnessing a genocide happening for years now on social media, and we're able to have more of a direct connection with people in Gaza than ever before. And whilst this the Israeli government has been able to act basically without any consequence. I think increasingly there's been more support for Palestinians than there ever has been, and for their struggle. And increasingly, we see a lot more disruptive actions, like certain groups who've now been banned and proscribed, where people are just reaching a point where they can't accept the system as it is anymore. And whilst I do think that there's a bleakness in the kind of corporate media who support this illegal migration myth, and political parties who are funded by this sort of dark money, Restore and Reform. There's also this really sort of fertile area where people are maybe feeling a bit politically homeless, but know that they don't want any of those options either. And I think there's you see it a little bit with the Green Party, with the increasing support for the Greens, and also just generally people having more appetite for alternatives. And I know even people like Gary Stevenson, Gary's Economics. I know he's sort of gone on hiatus now, but increasingly more people are interested in a wealth tax, and millionaires, people like Gary Lineker and this cabal of millionaires saying taxes more. So I know that then they're all slightly, they're slightly separate from, they're slightly a bit away from the deportation stuff, but I think it's part of an ecosystem actually where increasingly people are more pro compassion as opposed to exploitation and division. And the illegal migration myths come from that feeding that division, these divisions, and increasing exploitation. So actually maybe things are going to crack and it'll go the other way, and we'll have a revolution. I'd love that. But if not, I do see more of this kind of non-hierarchical kind of horizontal movements of action in different pockets of society.
Yeah, it's great. Something I say on the podcast all the time. It's great. I'm really happy that these organisations exist, like groups like yours, or groups like No Known Kitchen that I've been on the podcast a couple of times, Sea Watch and stuff, that do such amazing things. But they shouldn't need to exist. But they do exist, and that makes me feel better.
Yeah, exactly. And I just wanted to mention as well an organisation, the Joint Council for Welfare of Immigrants. Yeah. And basically they've been running a campaign to try and basically stop these five airline companies who have been running these deportation schemes in the one in, one out scheme. So that's Corridor Airlines, Air France, Albastar, TUI, and of course Titan. And so they've been having sort of days of action, and also an ongoing kind of letters writing campaign to contact the CEOs of these companies and the shareholders to ask them and tell them to stop. Because obviously many people, in fact, all the people who were on these flights came seeking safety in the UK, fleeing war and persecution, including children. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to JCWI and their campaign work, and encourage your listeners to sign this letter, to write letters to these companies, and join in any other actions against the companies.
Yeah, JCWI are ace. I want to get them on the podcast. And I 10 years ago, I was an intern there, the communications intern. So they're ace, and I want to get them on the podcast. Hopefully I'll get them on eventually. All right, Toni, that was a really great conversation. I feel like we can keep talking. I feel like I've got loads more to ask you, but we should end it here. I know you're going on holiday. And so have a nice holiday. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. And good luck. And do share any more Corporate Watch stuff. Send it my way.
Yes, also I just wanted to say at Corporate Watch, we don't take any money from companies or governments, and we're supported by generous donations from our readers. So if you do like our work, please consider helping us by following us on Instagram, Bluesky, and you can find our work on corporatewatch.org, and you can donate if you can afford it. whatever you can afford.
Yeah, I encourage people to do so. They should definitely do that. All right, Toni, thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks so much. Cheers. Have a nice day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, that was episode 91 of the Civil Fleet podcast. Can you believe it? 91 episodes. It's amazing. Can't believe I've done that many episodes. Anyway, so thanks again to Toni for coming on the Civil Fleet podcast. Thanks to Corporate Watch as well for organising this. They reached out to me, which was really nice, to come on the podcast. And I loved this chat with Toni. It was really, really interesting. Titan Airways seems to be up to some pretty terrible things. Do check out the show notes. We talked about a lot of stuff in this episode. I've got a bunch of notes, so if you check out on your phone or on YouTube if you're watching on there or wherever, there's a bunch of notes and you can read some more. Okay, at the end of the episode, I like to remind you to check out the blog, civilfleet.com. You can find some news stories, investigative reports, and some interviews on there. I've not really updated it much recently because I've been super busy, but hopefully I'll get some more time to write on there soon. Okay, if you like what the Civil Fleet does and you would like to help us to continue to platform the amazing people that I have been lucky enough to get on this podcast, then there's a couple of things that you can do. You can tell your friends about us. You can send this podcast to people that you know. You can share us on social media, let the world know about this podcast. You can give us reviews on podcast apps. That would be ace. You can also give us some money if you like. You can go to co-fi.com/civilfleet. You can donate the price of a coffee, or you can make a monthly subscription if you like. And there's a bonus episode on there if you do that. So you can get access to that. And so that's co-fi. That's ko-fi.com/civilfleet. And if you think you know someone that should be on this podcast, or your organisation or your activism would suit this podcast, then reach out to us. You can contact us at info@civilfleet.com. That's info@civilfleet.com, and you might get on the podcast. All right, that'll do. That's enough from me. See you in episode 92. Cheers.